Hello, my name is Dr. George Walters-Sleyon. I'm an author and a professor, and I have produced 6 books. My recent book is the second volume or volume 2 of a book entitled, a series entitled, 2-volume work entitled The Rush for Black Diamonds. Now, just to let you know, the rush for black diamonds or black diamonds refers to people that were traded in a transatlantic slave trade, basically black Africans. And I'm very particular about black Africans. Black diamonds is a metaphor referring to black people. And it was first used by Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, in his analysis of the slave trade. And in my books, I have produced these 2 volumes. Volume 1, The Rush of Black Diamonds, Volume 1, looks at, from John Locke to Thomas Jefferson, the transatlantic slave trade to chattel slavery in the UK and the US. Volume 2, which just came out recently, last week, looks at chattel slavery to penal slavery in the US and the UK, 1865 to post-1970. It focuses on concepts of white supremacy, colonialism, prison theology, and penal ethics. We live in an era in which the necessity to emphasize the black experience or emphasize what is called black history, particularly in the United States or in the West, cannot be dismissed. And we are quite aware in this particular era of the attempt to dismiss that particular experience, which is very vital, or that particular history, which is absolutely vital. And so in these 2 books, Volume 1 and Volume 2, I gave you a panoramic view of sort of a historical kaleidoscope, a historical account of the transatlantic slave trade into the modern era. Okay, so it begins in the 1400s. Now, in this book, I look at particularly the role of philosophy in the justification of the transatlantic slave trade. And you may conclude how basically how philosophy built the slave trade and justified the slave trade and continued to sustain the concepts, the residues of the slave trade that are reflected in the emergence of historical concepts of racism and racialization of black people or people of African descent. Also related to that, you have concepts of what is referred to as the concepts, arguments for white supremacy, colonialism, whether old colonialism or neocolonialism, and what will also be called what I call the penal slavery. Penal slavery. So in Volume 1, I looked at the works of John Locke, the arguments of John Locke. And in this book, I highlight the importance of understanding John Locke's influence. John Locke, if you don't know, was the British officer for the formulation of the British slave trade and colonial policies. To a large extent, he was the Secretary of the British Parliament responsible for the British trades. As a matter of fact, John Locke was the person who wrote the Carolinas Fundamental Constitution, one of the oldest colonial constitutions, in which he argues that every slave master has absolute right to treat his slave whatever way he wants. I mean, beat them, kill them, rip them, whatever, you know. But he makes that. But John Locke is known as the father of Western liberalism when you talk about individualism and private property. John Locke would influence Thomas Jefferson, and we know Thomas Jefferson in Virginia. Virginia became the first first colony of the British Empire where black people were considered chattel property, according to the laws of Virginia. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson was absolutely important, and he literally plagiarized and used the arguments of John Locke. And as the third president, he practically implemented some of the concepts of John Locke. And we know what was happening at Monticello when you talk about Sally Hemings and his production of a slave population, and on, and breeding as well. That's volume 1. Okay, volume 2 picks up from volume 1 and from chattel slavery. So volume 1 looks at the transatlantic slave trade into chattel slavery. Volume 2, and into the end of slavery, so to speak. Volume 2 looks at chattel slavery into colonialism, whether neocolonialism and what is called penal slavery. Penal slavery. So chattel slavery would emerge largely in the United States under some of the constitutional mandates that Thomas Jefferson was involved with, that black people are literally cattle. And in this book, in volume 2, I look at the development of what would be called concepts of white supremacy and race and racialization as residues of the transatlantic slave trade, by focusing on the works of this guy, Immanuel Kant. Now, a lot of people don't know that Immanuel Kant, with all of his great works, The Critique of Pure Reason and Deontological Ethics, Immanuel Kant had some very terrible, negative, absolutely disturbing words for black people. As a matter of fact, he made it quite plain that black people were intellectually inferior and racially inferior to every other group of people, and thus they must be trashed and beaten as slaves and kept as slaves. So in this book, volume 1, I use Douglas and Du Bois to deconstruct Thomas Jefferson and John Locke. In this volume, I use Du Bois, Ida B. Wells. Okay, when you talk about Ida B. Wells, there isn't any way you can talk about lynching and abolition and the emergence of the racial concepts of the West without Ida B. Wells. And then I use Dr. Martin Luther King also to deconstruct, because what we are consistently faced with is the process, the consistent and continual process of deconstructing. So in both books, they are prescriptive, analytical, and descriptive. But I conclude in this book, volume 2, with the emergence of the penal, what I call penal slavery. So we have the transatlantic slave trade, you have chattel slavery, you have colonial slavery, and you also have penal slavery, which is with a high rate of incarceration of particularly black men in the U.S. and the U.K. Okay, so the U.S. has one of the highest 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's incarcerated population. In this book, I highlight that, but I raise the question as well as the UK. But I raised the question about the necessity of what I call appraising theology. Appraising theology. Do you think it's time for us to begin to think about appraising theology in light of the high rate of incarceration of particularly black people in the United States and the United Kingdom? So just go down the website for this book, and my work is on it's GeorgeWalters-Sleyon.com. And these books, as a matter of fact, are now being sold for half the price, and they are published by Whipping Stock, Cascade Books, for half the price until the 30th of November. But as Black History Month approaches, you might want to have these books as important resources to begin to teach your people. Again, thank you for listening. My name is Dr. George Walters-Sleyon. I'm the author of these books. Volume 1, The Rush for Black Diamonds. Volume 2, The Rush for Black Diamonds. Quite important resources. Thank you.